Hi all, welcome to Cine's classroom. I'm Cine Madhavan. Hope all of you are fine and keeping good health. In today's session, I'm going to discuss with you the liability clause of Memorandum of Association. This clause of Memorandum of Association contains the nature of liability of the members of the company. This clause is necessary for those companies whose liability is limited. So the memorandum of such company should contain that the members' liability is limited. You might be remembering the different kinds of company. That is, the registered company is of two types, and that is companies limited as well as companies which is unlimited. That is, the liability is limited as well as liability is unlimited. So there are two kinds of company, limited company as well as unlimited company. Coming to the limited company, the liability of the members of such companies are limited to a specified amount. It might be based on the shares held by them or based on the guarantee that they have provided. Okay, so limited companies are of two kinds. Companies limited by shares as well as companies limited by guarantee. So what is a limited company? A limited company is one in which the members' liability is limited to a specified amount. They cannot be asked to pay from their personal assets. That is, at the time of winding up of a company, we cannot demand the members to pay from their personal assets. They need to pay only a specified amount that might be agreed by them or based on the unpaid amount of the shares held by them. Okay, so limited company means the company whose liability is limited. That is, the members' liability is limited. Again, limited company is of two types. Company that is having limited liability limited by shares, and liability limited by guarantee. And coming to unlimited company means what? The members' liability is unlimited. That is, at the time of winding up of the share, what happens? They have to pay from their personal assets. So registered company is of two types, limited company as well as unlimited company. And limited company is again classified as company limited by shares and company which is limited by guarantee. So this clause of Memorandum of Association states that the company need to specify whether the members' liability is limited. So this particular clause is meant for companies whose liability is limited. So this clause of Memorandum of Association is necessary for those companies whose liability is limited. That is, a member's liability is limited. As stated earlier, there are two kinds of registered company, limited company as well as unlimited company. So limited company is again of two kinds, company limited by shares and companies which is limited by guarantee. Okay, so this clause of Memorandum of Association should state what is the liability of the members of the company. That is, limited liability members of the company. Again, they have to specify whether the liability is limited by shares or the liability is limited by guarantee. In case of companies whose liability is limited by shares, then the liability clause must state that the liability of the members shall be limited by shares. This means the liability of the member is limited towards the nominal value of shares held by that person. For example, just imagine a person is purchasing 100 shares from a company having a face value of rupees 10 each. And that person has already paid 7 per share. That means he has paid for 7 rupees per share, that is 700 rupees he has paid. So that person's liability at the time of winding up of the company will be rupees 300. That is the unpaid amount. The unpaid amount is 3 per share. So that person's liability will be limited to 300. That is the unpaid amount of the shares held by him, beyond which he needn't pay anything. Even if the company incurs any liability, his liability will be limited towards the unpaid amount of the shares held by him. He needn't pay beyond that, or he needn't pay from his personal asset because his liability is limited. If in that case, the liability clause of the Memorandum of Association should state that the liability of the member is limited by shares. Okay. So, if the shares are partly paid, the liability is limited towards the amount which remains unpaid. And if the shares are fully paid, that is all the amount is paid by that person, the liability of the member is nil. So under this clause, the liability clause, the proposed company have to state the liability of the members of the company. And this is in the case of companies whose liability is limited. Again, they have to specify whether the liability is limited by shares or by guarantee. If it is in the case of shares, that is in the case of companies limited by shares, and the shares are partly paid, the liability is limited towards the amount which remains unpaid. And if the shares are fully paid, then the liability of the members is nil. Okay. Now comes in the case of companies whose liability is limited by guarantee. This liability clause must state that the liability of the members will be limited by guarantee. That is the amount that they have guaranteed or promised to pay towards the company at the time of winding up of the company. That is, they have promised that they will pay or they will contribute towards the company certain amount at the time of winding up. So, in case a company is limited by guarantee, again the liability clause of the Memorandum of Association should state that. That is, the liability of the members is limited by guarantee. Guarantee means the amount that they have promised to give at the time of winding up of the company. So, the liability clause will also state the amount which every member undertakes to pay towards the company at the time of winding up of the company. And that should be stated in the liability clause of the Memorandum of Association. So, a member cannot be asked to pay anything before winding up or before liquidation. Okay, so they have promised that at the time of winding up of the company, they are ready to pay certain amount. And that should be mentioned in the liability clause of the Memorandum of Association. Is that clear? So this liability clause of Memorandum of Association states the liability of its members. That is the nature of liability of its members, whether limited by shares or limited by guarantee. So this clause states that the liabilities of members is limited. In case the liability of the company is limited by share, this clause should state that the liability of the members of the company is limited by shares. That is, it means the member's liability is limited by the nominal value of shares held by him. And in the case of companies whose liability is limited by guarantee, the clause should state that the liability of members is limited by guarantee. The clause also should state the amount which the member undertakes to contribute towards the company at the time of winding up. So this is all about the liability clause of Memorandum of Association. I hope the concept is clear, that is the liability clause is clear for you. Stay tuned for the next class wherein I will discuss the capital clause of Memorandum of Association. Till then, take care. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.